Stutterer, but more importantly, and the subject of my talk, I am a life logger or self-tracker. What is life logging or self-tracking?
What is self-tracking?
Self-tracking is collecting personal data to achieve quantitative self-knowledge, and this is from the self-tracking book. Next page, please. Life logging is essentially the same thing, but it's just the chronicle of a person's life through data. Both of them are synonymous with the quantified-self movement. Can I quickly ask who else knows about the quantified self or any of the aforementioned subjects? Has anyone heard of self-tracking? No?
I know a bit from our discussion earlier.
Okay.
The
quantified self is a movement in effect, and it primarily refers to using numbers as a means of monitoring and measuring elements of everyday life and embodiment, but it can also be interpreted as an ethos. So in the Netherlands there is now a quantified institute in Groningen, if I made that sound right, which was set up about 6 years ago. And it looks into everything which the quantified self started about 20 odd years ago. So we go back to the next slide. The history of self-tracking. Self-tracking is not a new phenomenon. It's been around for a millennia. We've found records of people who've been using very basic data entry from kind of like the 12th century onwards. But a more famous example would be Benjamin Franklin, who used charts and short notes in the execution of this plan for self-examination. But it's become more popular and more prevalent over the past 20 odd years since the rise of personal computing. It is everywhere. It's in your smartphone, your car, but it's also in like a much wider basis. It's in the criminal justice systems, the NHS, the workplace. It is everywhere. It is now part of our modern world. And here's a short video that I'm going to show you from what people who've been using methods of self-tracking can do with what they've learned. I might just fast forward it.
Went back to my general practitioner and he said, well, it's going to sound weird, but in Ayurveda, this is called Vata imbalance. It's like 4,000-year-old Indian science. Gave me a kind of a thumbnail sketch of what that involved.
Her name is Anne Wright, I think, and what she did is that she had I think an autoimmune problem, and she worked out through personal data what elements of her diet were triggering symptoms, and when she found certain food stuff, I think from the nightshade family, or had some trace with the nightshade family, were triggering a lot of her autoimmune symptoms. So from learning that, she then changed her life around and she became not cured, but she could effectively manage her condition very well. Other stuff that has inspired me in self-tracking. There's a person called Seth Roberts who found that after eating half a stick of butter every day increased his speed at solving arithmetic problems every morning. Similarly, there was a guy called Wayne Kinsler, a person with bipolar disorder, who accidentally life-logged his music, and from that he found whether or not he was about to have a manic depressive episode. So it's now becoming part of health and also mental health, which is very important for what I'm doing. So why have I started life logging or self-tracking? So why do most people start life logging or self-tracking? In a study, they found that self-trackers begin for one of three reasons: health, productivity, or new life experiences, experimentalism. It's really about experimentalist philosophy, is what a lot of people do. But why did I personally do it? I began for all three at the same time. First of all, I have a stutter. Second of all, I was a serial procrastinator, and I was very ineffective at my university degree. I still go to university, but through what I've been doing, have managed to understand where I've been going wrong, as I'll explain later. But also thirdly, I think if you go back, thirdly, there are new life experiences which I would like to try out at university, and I thought, why not try that through numbers, essentially? Why not log that and learn from it rather than the kind of vague assumption that what I'm doing is all fun and crazy, and I think it's good for me, having no real way of empirically knowing that, and that's what I'm trying to understand, as well as measuring my stutter and my productivity. So, first of all, I was not trying to, when I set out my first self-tracking, I was not trying to cure my stutter. I wanted to understand what made my speech go up and down. I'm mostly comfortable with stuttering now. It's the inconsistency of not knowing from which day to the next my speech is going to be bad or good. I think that's one of the common complaints that people who stammer is, I don't know what my speech will be like on a Wednesday or a Thursday next week, even if it's not even that important. But just the knowledge essentially of a very mysterious thing was what I was trying to find out. And after finding these factors, I wanted to either eliminate or minimise those that aggravated my speech, or emphasise or develop those that improved my speech, simply because I wanted to ease the kind of burden of stuttering. And I also wanted, funny enough, to provide evidence for the Maguire programme, which I have been on since about the age of 18. I'm now 22. And I'd always wanted to help out, really, because the Maguire programme has resisted evidence for a long period of time. And when I started out over a year ago now, or like around about a year ago, I really wanted to give the Maguire programme the evidence that they really needed. But I've later found out that they actively resist attempts at measurement and attempts to help the programme through stuff which the speech language therapy community require, which is research and studies and so on. But I also wanted to investigate long-standing suspicions about what influenced my speech, which were as mad as the moon, nuts, and bananas, which in short you could say were lunatic, nutty, and bananas. So these are really kind of strange theories. In fact, my mother, I kind of put down to that moon one because she still thinks that the moon influences her speech. And while there is now some science which does suggest that the moon does influence sleep cycles, there's nothing yet about anything else that the moon does, but it's only slight with the sleep cycle. You know.
I didn't know there's an ancient. Is it almonds or?
Almonds, yes.
Yeah,
That's
almonds.
less exactly. So that
Almonds is an ancient treatment for stammering.
yeah. So I think it's also using Egyptian culture.
Well, I didn't know
Almonds
that.
were used as well.
Interesting.
But again, that's something which I was hoping to dismiss through my research. Okay. And part of the kind of studies and stuff which were used to help my case was this study published by Guntu Pillai, who said that self-reports are primary tools for measuring the efficacy of stuttering treatments. Only self-reports can tap into the experiential sense of loss of control or involuntary neural block. Self-reports can quantify level 1 experience, social behaviours such as the use of avoidances and so on. But currently in stuttering research, they are secondary tools most often to validate overt measures, which are often inaccurate, as it basically explains. So yes, I was using this also as kind of an academic reason why I was using my self-tracking alone when I first started. So when I first started, it wasn't very high-tech at all. It was very low-tech. I was using what anyone can use, which is just a pen and paper. And so I actually, funny enough, wasn't looking into my stuttering when I first started because I was more concerned about the effects of alcohol on my anxiety, which I kind of put in the same bracket as my stutter. So I first was looking at how drink influence sleep and anxiety. And I only did this for 4 days before I realised the limitations, which were that I had to write everything down in a notebook which I could lose, and so I thought I need to update it. I then turned to an Excel spreadsheet in which I made 30 entries responding to 22 variables, in which I was looking about anxiety, stress, thinking about stuttering. Funny enough, I still wasn't measuring how I perceived my stuttering severity or my speech satisfaction, which later became the cornerstone of my self-reports. So I was still really focused more on like the health side and the alcohol side, so I was still drinking at that point. But there were lots of problems. First of all, I could see all of my previous entries, and that would inform my subsequent reports. So I thought that brings down the validity quite a lot. I need to change things. So I then decided to update it one step further. I'll just run through those fours again. And I found online this app called Reporter, which you can buy on the App Store for about £5. And essentially it is a customizable set your own questions app, and you can set any kind of questions you so wish. There's a random sampling feature which is really helpful, because rather than having to set times, you can do random sampling. I ended up not using that feature, but I would like to in due course. It also collected passive environmental data, which I'm having trouble to extract because in a different format to a CSV, which is a very easy readable file. But also, it was also very portable, so I have it in my pocket, or it's over there. But I have it on my phone, and I can do it anywhere, at any time that I so choose. So it was very handy. And it also looked very good, which as an art student I took quite a priority over when I first started using the app. And also the previous reports were hidden, so it was the validity of the data was marginally increased. It's kind of cheap. Done by a guy called Nicholas Felton, who launched the app, the Reporter app, and he spent around 100 hours a year making random reports, frankly on quite boring elements of his life. Stuff like how he was feeling about his work, what he'd spoken about. By the way, there was nothing wrong with him, he was just curious about data collecting. But he then made this amazing thing called the Felton Report, which he has released annually since 2005. And actually some of it now resides in the MoMA permanent collection. It's kind of this very heavily aesthetic object, but it also plots out his life, how he's lived the life over several years. And he also found certain correlations, most which are quite easily observable. You don't really need much data, but I suppose it's kind of nice to have the data in print, isn't it? So looking at weight versus heart rate, found lots of correlations between these ones. So I was inspired by this kind of stuff. And then I made my first report on the 11th of the 11th last year. My first entry was a paltry 1 variable, in which I asked myself, do I feel confident? As you can see, that day I was on a high, loving life, very confident. Naturally things change as the years progress. Second entry, 3 variables, and this increased exponentially to 4 variables, and so on and so on and so on. 100 variables, 131 variables, and gradually the time I would spend on the report per day increased significantly. And at first I was, this is about a minute's worth of work, the first entry. By the 13th I was spending up to an hour on it per day. And this continued until today, when I now do on average 335 variables per day. I've made over 800 entries. I should make a point, which I think is very important to make, that the variables I'm reporting on aren't consistently 335. So there are some variables which I'll only need to report on every week. So for example, one of them would be, have you attended support group? In which case I would put down, yes I have, but that would only be on a Wednesday every fortnight, for example. So it's not 435 questions, it's more of a, when I need to fill it in, I do fill it in. It's more about, I'm answering about 250 variables per day, which is still quite a lot. And bearing in mind that also I'm asking myself these questions sometimes more than once. So I'll ask myself in the morning, lunchtime, in the evening. So there are 3 sets, and actually my timeline, well that's just my use. But my daily schedule is I wake up, breakfast, and I spend 32 minutes answering 110 questions. What time did I get out of bed? If I feel tired, do I think my speech will be good that day? I then lunch 45 minutes, but the real test comes in the evening when I have to ask myself how my day went. One of which is time spent with attractive women, which obviously is all the time. But one obvious. Also just things which could act as potential triggers. For example, things like time spent with hip and cool. So I go to art school. A lot of people like to put a lot of emphasis on being hip, trendy, cool. You name it. This could and has in the past been a trigger because it's like they're cool. I want to impress them. But this is a very individualised report, so these things really only apply to things that I think are my potential triggers. And when I first started reporting, I felt as if the hip and the cool were a trigger. They've since become people I don't really think of as much as
Time spent with a hip and cool.
Yeah.
Because I like the hip and cool.
Hip and cool as
Hip
opposed to
and
just
cool.
hip.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like the way it's worded.
How precise are your time? I mean, is that in minutes or quarter of an hours, or
As
in terms of the time
as in
recorded?
So that is an average over how much I've done throughout the past 6 months. So some days I would spend
Oh, I see.
over 2 hours on the evening report because
Yeah.
I'd be doing
No,
something else.
I'm looking at when you say what you're recording is time spent with attractive women. Is that, do you record each day how much time you've spent? Or
Yes,
yeah. So so my question was
in minutes.
in minutes. So I
In
see,
minutes,
in minutes,
yeah,
right?
in minutes.
So that of its nature must be approximate because you don't go around thinking, oh, there's another minute, and there's another minute.
No, sure.
Yeah,
So it's a
yeah,
very
I get- yeah,
generalised set of
Sure,
data that
yeah,
I'm making here.
So do you find that if you drink more, you think you're spending more time with attractive women?
Oh, beer goggles phenomenon. Well, funny enough, by the time I started my self-reporting using the Reporter app, I found myself stopping drinking entirely. In fact, I haven't really drunk at all since then. So that's the one thing which, ironically, reason why I started, or one of the factors why I started, I since don't have any real data about because I've stopped drinking. That said, I'm planning to, at some point in the near future, spend a week binge drinking and then finding out from that what the influence is on my speech. And we'll see, because it might be the case that my speech isn't so bad, but my anxiety levels increase after a night out. Because I personally my experience with alcohol is that I'm not very fluent when I drink, but then the morning after I'm incredibly fluent and can't conceive of stuttering, which I think isn't very typical, is it? I think most people
as well.
as well.
If I'm hungover, I'm fluent.
Yeah, there we go. And that indicates that it's more than just a case of, oh, it's because you aren't very anxious. It's probably because there's some kind of chemical thing happening in your brain, maybe. That's what I'm looking to find out. Because no one really has investigated lifestyle choices of people who stammer, because it's more about the stammer itself. It's less about the holistic things that could be potential triggers.
Yes, alcohol, it's your old question. Yes, it all depends how much you drink, isn't it? Alcohol, it all depends how much. One or two.
Potentially. I mean, it kind of remains to be seen. I mean, for some people, we would naturally, most people think that if they drink more alcohol, they get more fluent. And
Yes.
who knows why that's the case? it might be the case that people just feel more confident, or they don't register their stutter. It hasn't been investigated, so we
No.
can't say conclusively why that's the case. And obviously it's very individualised, so for
Yeah.
some people, like myself, I get less fluent and I'm more fluent in the morning. For other people it might be very different. You might get incredibly fluent and then less fluent in the morning. So that's why I was starting, but ironically didn't measure alcohol. So other things that I've used to self-track. One of the internet plugins that I found very helpful is a thing called Rescue Time, which you can download and you can access all of your data on a monthly subscription of £5 a month. And essentially it maps your activity on your computer. So what applications you're using, what websites you access, and it's very precise because it essentially is working on a computer model. So everything is to a T. It's brilliant for that. I also have a Fitbit, which I purchased recently, but I found it isn't very accurate, and my sleep data has been wildly off the charts. It's been up to like 1,000 hours a day or a few minutes, which is just totally inaccurate. So that really hasn't helped at all, and I actually know of other stuff that I can use to tackle it. But currently, it's actually been the worst thing I've used so far. It's my Fitbit, which is completely at odds with what they market it as, as being the most reliable measuring kit out there. Why are there so many variables? So stuttering is an experiential disorder. There are lots of theories and factors that have been attributed to stuttering, and it's important to find those that apply to my speech specifically, because we have to take an individualised approach with our speech, and therefore finding those factors, I can then see what theories have been used about those factors and see if they work and apply them. I'm also wondering whether variables that are unrelated to stuttering could become potential factors. I mentioned earlier nuts, lunacy and bananas. What if they actually have some grounding? What if there's like an extra 2% chance of being more satisfied with my speech on a full moon? Who knows? That's what I'm really interested in looking out for.
Nuts, so what kind of nuts do you eat?
Yeah, exactly.
It's
So these are my
interesting.
examples, and these are some of the kind of range of questions that I've asked. And often they've been informed from people that I've spoken to who wanted to find out about my speech. So Max, who I think studied sound, or probably the acoustic system and speech, asked me to put down as one of my variables, was it loud in places you were speaking? So I put that in. But I found that very hard to measure because obviously if you're in a city like London, where I live, you find yourself constantly changing from a very loud environment like the underground to a bus and so on and so forth. It's very difficult to measure. There are ways of objectively doing that with a microphone chip, but it's still early days in the sense that there's still lots of development that I need to work on. Yeah, so that's a variety of the questions, but there were 335 unique questions that I was asking myself. This is an important one. It's kind of my bugbear about the recent renaming. Why stutter and not stammerlog? In Europe, and this is just Europe, more Germanic languages use the bilabial N. However, the German preference for stottern, which uses the alveolar T, makes it the most pervasive version of stammer or stutter in Europe, with roughly 160 million German and Dutch speakers who use it. Next slide, please. So in total, there are 95 million who use a variation of stammer, Swedish, Norwegian, and British English. But there are 500 million plus who use a variation of stutter, and also probably even more. I mean, obviously that's the whole plus thing, but probably in the region of 1 billion if you take into account the people who use English as a second language, or how kind of know a handful of English words. They are so much more likely to use stutter than stammer, which we hold on to for some bizarre reason. So I'm very pro, and that's so frustrating because this doesn't have the current date, but essentially the red indicating stutter massively spikes from the year 2000 onwards and is up here, while stammer is way down here. So while stammer was formerly the most commonly used word, the bilabial stammer, it has since become replaced by the alveolar T. So I'm all for stutter over stammer, and that's why it's called stutterlog and not stammerlog.
Ah,
I think that's interesting. I mean, I often get asked, is stammering the same as stuttering?
Yeah.
You know, by people of all backgrounds.
Yeah.
And you know, UK is a multicultural society as well. So
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think we're sort of making life harder for us.
Exactly.
It really is understood
Yeah.
by having this additional screen,
Yeah.
which is the word stammer.
I was also speaking with Phil last night about this and how he uses keywords in his profession to find out about studies and so on, which are working about stuttering or stammering, and it costs twice as much to put in stutter and stammer. So why not just universalise it under stutter? I mean, this could be applied to lots of British English. I don't know why we stick onto certain spellings. I think it's frankly a bit sentimentalist and a bit old fuddy-duddy stuff.
Spelling. I like OR instead of OR for words like the colour. I always slightly bristle when I
But I suppose really they're more.
American.
But I suppose really they are more
something.
emotional arguments than the kind of more like
Yeah.
this is helping people who stutter. But I get that. I mean, that's obviously like a bit different. But for the sake of medical
Yeah.
stuff, I think it should
And-
be universal.
But I've read some things online where people seem to think there's a difference between a stammer and a stutter.
Exactly.
Stutter is one
It needs
thing and
clearing
stammer
up.
is something else.
Yeah.
And yeah, but that's
As a quick
Quite
interjection, because
confusing.
there was a previous conference at Telford, Shropshire, Wellington, and there was a very good presentation from a German expert, and he used both terms, but he used stutter for what most of us are talking about, but he used the word stammer, if I remember rightly, for, and it's a condition I'm beginning to get, when as an older person or somebody, you roughly know what you want to say, but you can't get the words together in your head, and so you get a hesitation.
Word retrieval difficulties. Yeah.
That's it. Oh,
Yeah.
elegantly put. Word retrieval difficulty.
He's younger.
But that's essentially idiosyncratic use of language. He's using it that way, but that's kind of a bit useless. Well, language only works if we're all agreed this word means that. So,
Yeah.
although it's good that he's using different terms.
Yeah.
It's a little
But
bit
anyways, we mustn't interrupt your general flow, but I'm not going to be at the open mic session, but I think if the BSA is going to be, quotes, rebranded, now's the time,
Yeah.
frankly, isn't it?
I would be in favour of
Sorry.
saying leaving the
Yeah.
word stammer behind,
No,
with a heavy heart,
Yeah.
because it makes it more universal.
Yeah.
Well, I'd encourage people to keep that back, because this is a great opportunity to.
Yeah.
And Jane's very interested in what we think.
Yeah.
Anyway, on with the self-tracking. So this is just quickly a classic day outside my house. My house is opposite, and this is me measuring my speech as I do with a 52mm lens in like hyperfocus. Your average day. I'm measuring my stammer, and this is the Likert scale that I use. I say negligible, slight, mild, slightly bad, not great, bad. And I have these all then quantified afterwards. So for instance, a mild might be a 4, slightly bad, a 5, and so on and so forth. But so just to kind of clarify, so I've now accumulated lots of data. Some of it's great, some of it's not, and by that I mean that some of it's very clean data, so it's data that's very easily readable, and there isn't any kind of problems with various kind of small bits of information that got stuck somewhere in there. And so far, the thing that I've found is easiest to read or understand is how does spending time with people like you guys, who also stutter I should say, affect me. So I'm looking here, at the self-reports that I've made on days that I've been at a support group, at a speech therapy session with Phil, at a X, Y, or Z. And so from that, I've made my self-reports morning, lunchtime, evening. And we can find here some of the graphs that I've been made. I should add that I don't have any background in statistics. I've a friend who very kindly managed to help me over the past week and a half with my statistics, but I'm still floundering about trying to understand things like Spearman's row and X, Y, and Z. I honestly am really lacking in that department, but I thankfully found a few people on this event, in fact, who've offered to help me understand or rather make sense of my data sets. So it'd be great to get that fully sorted, but from what I can see here, so for instance, this y-axis indicates the time I've spent with people who stutter, and this indicates my fluency, and it's very slight, but it does show that the more time I spend with people who stutter, the less severe my speech is. I don't like saying fluency, I say kind of less severe or aggravated my speech is. And it's only like a very slight one, but I think that's kind of like a very basic graph that indicates what I was looking at. But it gets a bit better as I look through other variables. My speech satisfaction climbs up even more the more I spend with people who stutter. I should add that this time spent with people who stutter is looking at is using the unit of, I think, hours, not minutes. So perhaps it's like a bit less extreme than it would be if it was looking at minutes. But anyway, that's what statistics does. It makes things which aren't that great looking on this kind of graph very amplified. So that's what my education in statistics will hopefully bring me. My stress levels massively decline the more I spend with people who stutter, as this one indicates. Equally, the comfort in using stuttering modification techniques. I'm a Maguire graduate, though I don't really use much technique often. But it shows you that the more time I spend in the company of you guys, the more comfortable I feel using technique. A lot of these observations are almost like self-explanatory, and you could just make them up and say, well, obviously you feel more comfortable. But having this in a graph as a piece of hard data, as opposed to just a generalised, if you do this, it'll happen, is of so much more value, at least to myself, who kind of really puts a lot of value on empirical research than lots of other things. That's again the amount of technique that I use. It increases a lot as well, though I'm really not using it at all in this conference.
Can I just make a small comment? So I did mention this in another group yesterday that there's some research that's come out of the US very recently, which looked at the stress felt by fluent or people who don't stand and stutter, the brain reaction in terms of the stress level in the brain, listening to a video of a man stuttering. And what it found, it's quite simply, is that the more familiar the listener is with hearing somebody stutter, the less stressed the brain reaction is. And the less, and for people who've never heard of another person stutter, the stress reaction was significantly higher. And it was actually, everybody had a stress reaction, even if you lived with somebody who stuttered. But it was significantly less, and it was even less in females than males.
That's very interesting.
So that's, so I can send you the details if you're interested in the email of the people who did the research, because I'm in contact with them.
In a way that probably explains why there are so many more speech therapists who are female than male, or may contribute to why that's the case.
Yeah, good point.
Next one. Oh yeah, so this is my eloquence against the time I spend in the company of people who stutter. So I feel more eloquent, bearing in mind that this is all self-reported, so that there is nothing objective about this data in the sense that I haven't read back all of my speech and then found that yes, I was using this particular adjective more than I was in the company of a fluent person, but I feel more eloquent in the company of you guys, essentially. And I also I use my speech. Actually, you know what? I actually kind of forgot which way it goes, but I think it's the more uncontrolled speech I use is in the company of people who stutter. This one's interesting. How intelligent I thought I was. Again, this isn't objective in the slightest. But it does increase the more I spend in the company of people who stutter. Probably because I'm talking about something which I like to read about and research about, and therefore I'm talking about something which I feel well versed on, and so on. So that might explain it. Happiness increases. That's a really good thing. Happiness is wonderful. It's not so extreme that it's like eureka, total euphoria.
It's not manic.
No, it's not quite that extreme. Yes, maybe the next time I kind of measure this, it might be enormous. But it just shows that my happiness increases when I'm with people. So thank you for making me happy. Slightly happier. And also not all the time, as you can see, a few exceptions. Interesting findings, and I was using, in this case, what's known as a linear model. And I frankly don't understand what it means. But the person who's working with me, who's a stats, not expert, but a stats undergrad, she knew what she was talking about and said that this is about what variables depend on what variables. But I'm sure, I don't really know what's going on, but that sounds right. Oh, actually, I think this is something else. Yeah, actually, this was interesting. So this shows the more comfortable I am using certain technique, the more aggressive I feel, which is in a way bizarre. But when I was thinking about it, and when I was thinking about the Maguire graduates, a lot of those who really succeed using these techniques tend to be youngish or middle-aged men. You know, those who probably have kind of peak testosterone levels, who are like, yeah, I really am a stammerer, and I'm going to use this technique, and I don't care what people think. So in a way that kind of makes sense about the whole aggression increasing the more comfortable I am with the stammer.
So I would say assertive rather than aggressive.
And actually, that's funny you say that, Stu, because that comes next.
Okay.
Well, not next, but soon, basically. This says how rested I feel. This one came up on the linear model, but on the graph looks terrible. But it shows that the more rested I was, the less severe my stomach got. And this is very stupid because I forgot to put less severe and put how severe. So it basically that is entirely inverted, which is very stupid for me. This was interesting. This shows the distribution of my speech severity as the day progresses. And what this shows is that when I start out, this is first thing in the morning, my speech is average. Probably because I haven't spoken to many people, just Johanna, or I spoke with a flatmate. No one really. By midday, by lunchtime, I've spoken to more people, and there's more variation in how severe my speech is. Although it's interesting that it actually there is fluency is more likely to decrease than it is to increase during lunchtime. But this changes more by the evening and by the time I go to bed, when it's not quite evenly weighted in that it is still more likely to go down than it is to go up. But there is still kind of like a slightly larger margin of improvement or chance of improvement than there is a chance of becoming more aggravated in my stuttering. So that just shows that there's real change over the course of one day. This is a very simple one, but important to get out there, is how satisfied I am with my speech, actually for support for other reasons. It shows that even though I profess to be comfortable in stammering, and I feel as if I am most of the time, the data suggests that how satisfied I am with my speech is pretty much directly correlated with how fluent I am, which shows that I've got a long way to go in self-acceptance. Even though I profess quite a lot to be a very self-accepted stammerer, I still say basically kind of subconsciously that the more fluent I am, the happier I am with my speech, which I was kind of like a bit shocked by. But it's hard data, and you can't really argue with it.
John, could that be because you don't notice or don't perceive any or as many disfluencies now? Because
could
you're
be.
happy with your speech.
It could be. That's
I don't think
another
I
very
do,
good
in my case.
point, actually, yeah. In that fluency, again, this is entirely self-reported data. And so I might say that I'm not very fluent after I've been at work, where I might not be speaking much, but I've spoken once and it's really bad stammer. And then I think I'm really severe, even though the rest of my day I'm very fluent. So again, this is very open to interpretation. It's nothing really concrete, but it really shows you that it seems as if the more fluent I am, the more satisfied I am, in spite of what I believe. But you're right in that it could be down to how I perceive fluency.
Next one.
Again, it shows fluency and assertiveness. So the more assertive I am, the more fluent I am, which is interesting because I haven't looked at if I'm using stuttering techniques, or maybe I have. This also speaks satisfaction measured against assertiveness. So the more assertive I become, the more satisfied I am with my speech, which ties into, I think, assertiveness theories, which I'm not sure about. I've only learned about that recently from one of the workshops here, but I think assertiveness therapy is something which is used with people who stammer, and the data suggests that is the case. That the more assertive I am with my speech, the happier I am with it. This is looking at my perceived depth of voice measured against being assertive, and I perceive my voice to be deeper with how assertive I am, and I suppose that's probably related to testosterone and the fact that I'm being more aggressive with my speech and therefore gets deeper. 10, thank you. This is how tight my chest is. So I think, like many people, stuttering can induce physical tension, and one of the symptoms that I get is quite a tight chest. Not all the time, it was a lot more pronounced when I was younger, but tightness of the chest, in which I still occasionally get. And I found that, hold on, I'm just thinking, you know, I'm not great at even reading my own data, which is stupid, but anyway. I think it's saying here, and I'm sure someone else could be very easily correct me, but the tighter my chest is, the less assertive I am. And that's what it's saying here. Next one, please. This one is showing self-actualization, which is a bit of an intangible concept. It's the idea of being comfortable with yourself and being kind of like, I'm okay with everything in my life kind of feeling. And it shows that the more the more rested I am, the more comfortable I am with myself. And self-actualization, I'm not sure if it's amongst the slide, but self-actualization is pretty much directly correlated with speech satisfaction. Not so much with fluency as much, but there's still a slight correlation there, but self-actualization seems to be really important in a lot of the factors that I want to improve, that being speech satisfaction. Please. So these are the first trickle of findings. I think I've really only just tapped the very tip of the iceberg here, because there are 335 variables. I only managed to get really clean data for every single entry for only 60 of them. And so what you see here is kind of like some of the results of 60 of those variables. But that's about a fifth of what I could potentially uncover. So the first findings, a strange one is that productivity depends on how well rested I am and, weirdly enough, vowel difficulty. So how productive I am seems to correlate, not necessarily, this way, but this actually is a linear model, so this shows if it is dependent, and it shows that the more productive I am, the more I struggle on vowels, but not consonants, because I was also measuring consonants. Why that is remains to be seen, and that's one of the interesting findings so far. Procrastination depends on how calm I am and whether I slept in the afternoon. A lazy day, that's not so weird a finding. Third one is how much screen time I do is related to how well rested I am and the amount of people I talk to after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is after lunch. Third one, self-actualization, is found to depend on speech satisfaction and also how well rested I am. Stuttering severity depends on fluency, but that one's kind of obvious. But also depends on how well rested I am, how much hand gestures I use, almost as a way of compensating, and how satisfied I am with my speech. And I found the one about hand gestures fascinating, because that really said that the more I was using my hands, the more fluent I was. So for a long time I was like, keep my hands down by my sides. This is what the McGuire teaches you. I get why they say that. But I found that for myself, using hand gestures...
Why do they say that? Sorry to interrupt.
Because they say that because what they're aiming for is eloquent speech. And eloquent speech is I was measuring data and also how relevant my data would be to future research and whatever I'm doing. Is the fact that I was diagnosed with ADHD a while ago on the 19th, so about 3 months ago maybe. I found this out after I was writing my dissertation, and I was really struggling to structure sentences. I've always struggled with writing, in spite of having a stammer, which I always thought, lends yourself to being a good writer. Don't you always think to yourself, writing and people who stammer, they tend to go hand in hand. But I was rubbish at writing. I could make lots of good bullet points, but I can't do paragraphs sequentially, so it's sequencing that was my real problem, and also explain why. I was very badly behaved at school. I'm very, very disorganised, which explains why I was a bit late and a bit hackneyed and whatever. And also why, after taking stimulants, my speech improves. And by improves, I feel more effervescent, I feel more gregarious, I'm more satisfied, and so on. But also focus correlates with improved speed. I think I'm actually run a bit through this.
I'm not sure what that means.
So essentially, the more focused I am, and it's a bit of like a broad terms, that could be how focused I am doing work. It could also be how focused I am on my speech or whatever, the more fluent I am. Or a reduction in stuttering severity, which is very interesting because that potentially links into my ADHD and the fact that if I just pay more attention to how I'm speaking, the more fluent I become. That's very interesting. But again, I'm no statistician. I'm not sure if what I'm doing is entirely there yet. Also, the more focused I am, the more satisfied I am with my speech. And more extremely, the more comfortable I am in using techniques. But that's a really strong correlation. Look at that line. 45 degrees, beautiful. This is also how rested I am, increases with focus. So basically being focused is great. It really, really helps me in so many ways. But the case is yet to be closed, and the drugs that I'm currently taking, which are non-stimulant, really aggravate my speech. I'm really
Non-stimulants. So why are you taking them for your ADHD?
So basically, these stimulant drugs are addictive because they are effectively amphetamines.
Okay.
So they're like very close to meth or
So why are you
to
taking
cocaine.
that?
Why?
Yeah, why?
By the non-stimulants, because the non-stimulants are less addictive and also run fewer potential health risks.
And that helps your ADHD?
In theory. I haven't really noticed much of a change other than I'm like a lot more normal in my behaviour, but apart from that, I can't really see much else. So I'll probably quit taking it after my most recent week of doses. Anyway, the next one. Benefits of doing this, I really like, makes my experiential phase in life truly experiential. Habits I've avoided owing to fears about stammering, smoking, drinking coffee, I can return to with a pretext. Hooray! I can't wait to get back on the booze. Similarly, the experimentalist approach encourages me to enter fearful situations I'd avoided, echoing the echoing the experience of other self-trackers, it does give my life a real sense of purpose and a sense of control in that by taking in data I can think, okay, well I know that if I do this, I'm more likely, not guaranteed, but I'm more likely to end up with this emotion or this kind of stuff, which obviously is in itself flawed, seeing the human being as a computer, but equally there is some element of truth to it. All days yield data. Even wasted hours watching YouTube can be quantified. So I can kind of procrastinate with a purpose, but only if I then do the work that is doing the self-reporting. So I can't fully procrastinate for hours on end. And also, most importantly, I'm in a way waiting for lots of studies that haven't been published, that are being talked about. I can test for myself. So for instance, mindfulness, I'm not sure if there is a mindfulness study out there in its relationship with stuttering, but I want to try that. Yoga and so on. And I've just finished recently the first phase of a caffeine trial in which I was taking a very small amount, only I think 16 mg, which is like half a can of Coca-Cola worth of caffeine. And from that, I haven't looked at the data yet. It's been manic with all this stuff.